Hey friends, I want to talk to you today about something that I feel is so important when we're talking about having babies and postpartum recovery, and that is birth trauma. And whether that looks like for you physical trauma, like injuries and physical things that have happened to your body, or whether it's psychological trauma and it's memories and experiences replaying in your mind and the feeling that this creates in your body long term, I think it's a really important topic that we should talk about, and one that really isn't spoken about all that often in real life. We've kind of come to this point where I think a lot of the time we talk about all that matters is healthy mum, healthy baby. And yes, whilst of course having that healthy baby in your arms is your number one priority when you're having a baby, I think it's also important that you come out of it feeling good and feeling able to cope with what happened. I know for me, after my first birth experience, I really felt quite shell-shocked afterwards and like, what the hell was that? That was not what I was expecting. I experienced a lot of anxiety after my first baby, and whether that was because it was my first baby and I think your body kind of naturally puts you into a state of anxiety and I didn't know how to deal with that, or as a result of that traumatic birth, I'm not entirely sure, but I really was up here for a lot of that first year after having my first baby, just feeling like I had to be on high alert all the time and I couldn't relax, and it impacted so much of my life. It impacted how much I enjoyed having my baby, spending time with my baby. It impacted our relationship. It affected my relationship with myself and how I felt about my own body, which obviously affects how you interact with a partner. And of course, this is just my experience of birth trauma. Yours might look very different. Maybe you have ongoing fear of hospitals, maybe you feel guilt around the birth, about how it unfolded. And it doesn't just come from a natural birth, obviously. Women have trauma after cesarean birth. Women have trauma after very calm hypnobirths, and there are maybe certain aspects of it that were quite traumatic. It doesn't necessarily mean just because you got the birth you wanted that there wasn't an element of trauma within there. I think birth is such a unique, powerful, vulnerable experience that there are so many things that could happen within that, and if we're not given the right support during and after, I think it really can manifest as a traumatic experience. So your trauma might be manifesting in a whole number of ways. So if you relate to any of the things that I've been saying, maybe you just think about your birth and think like, holy shit, that was bad. This is something that I really think you should explore a little bit, not just because you want to go on and have other babies and have other birth experiences, but also because it really can affect your day-to-day life. You probably wouldn't think that it does because obviously we don't think about birth every day, but we carry that trauma with us. We carry that mark on our nervous system where it's heightened. And if we haven't done the work to process it, then it really can affect how we feel day to day. So the first thing that you need to do is really just acknowledge that what you are experiencing is a result of birth trauma. And the fact that you're here watching this video tells me you're already on that right track. So I think it just can be as simple as starting to say, yeah, my birth was really traumatic. I'm really glad that I had a happy baby, but the actual experience, it was really traumatic for me. And that doesn't necessarily mean going around and telling everyone, because I don't think it helps to spread this idea that birth has to be traumatic. The last thing we want is pregnant women going into birth for the first time or even for the second and third time being afraid, because that makes the whole experience worse because we're tight and tense and we want the opposite of that to give birth. So that's why I explained when I had my first birth experience, I really do think that the number one thing that I did wrong in that experience was not prepare myself beforehand. I didn't understand how my body worked. I didn't understand what I could do to work with it. I didn't understand the medical system that I was working within. And that knowledge, when I had it for my second birth, meant my experience was completely different. I chose different care providers. I chose a different system to birth under. It was really hands-off. I got to do what I wanted. And yes, I still did come out with birth injuries. I still had a tear. However, I didn't have the trauma. I wasn't traumatized by the experience. And my postpartum recovery and how I felt about my baby and my body and my partner and my life was so different because I wasn't carrying the trauma of that experience. So I think it's important to acknowledge that what you've experienced is birth trauma, and then I think it's important to talk about it. So talking about it to the right people, whether that be close friends, your mum, your partner. You could also talk to a counselor or someone like a physiotherapist if you're still experiencing the effects of a physical trauma. So perhaps you've had a tear or an episiotomy and you're still finding sex is painful, or maybe you've got a dragging feeling in that area. Going to see a physiotherapist and starting the conversation there is going to be really important. So they're going to be interested in the emotional side of it, what you went through, as well as the physical side of it, because obviously they're focused on helping you to fix the physical symptoms that you're experiencing. It can also be really helpful to fill in the gaps in your birth experience. And I know for me, when I think back on that very first birth, and like I explained to you, when it got really stressful and hectic, my memory is really blurry. And I think if I hadn't spoken about it with my partner, if I hadn't debriefed with my mom and really shared that, I don't know that I would be able to remember much for it. And I know people talk about like we don't remember birth because it's protective, we wouldn't have more children if we didn't remember it. But I disagree. I think it's important to know what happened so that we can learn from it, so that we can understand. And I think because it helps us to process what happened. If we don't have this idea in our head about what it looked like, it's really hard to come to a place where we can accept it and release those emotions of it. It's certainly not the whole picture. Understanding exactly what happened isn't going to get rid of your trauma, but I think it can be a step in the right direction into understanding what happened. So maybe you need to ring the hospital, ask for your notes, talk to your midwife, talk to your doula, whoever was there to support you. Ask them their experience of what happened so you can start piecing the gaps together and understand a little bit better. So psychological trauma takes time to heal, which as new mums is the thing that we have the least of. And this is why I think it's really important for all mums, but especially those who've had a traumatic birth, is you need to make space for your healing. So whether that looks like half an hour of a morning on your own whilst your partner takes your baby for a walk so that you can do a meditation, have some silence, do some journaling, do some yoga just to physically get back into your body and reconnect. Because if you've experienced physical trauma, and this was true for me after my episiotomy, I really just wanted to ignore this whole area. And I think that's why my healing was so bad, because I don't think I cared well enough for the wound, because I was really like, just don't want to know about it. And then once the wound had healed, I really then didn't do the work to become desensitized in that area. So whenever my partner touched me, I was like, ugh. So you can imagine that first experience of sex after having that baby was horrific, because I was so tense and tight and I hadn't done the work to feel okay with even myself touching that area. So it's important putting your hands in that area, giving yourself massage. If you've had a cesarean, getting comfortable with touching the cesarean scar are all really important things to start releasing those emotions that we're holding in those spaces of the body because we've been through a traumatic experience in that part of our body. So it's really important to try and make that time and space. Even having a bath can be a right step because you're just being in your body. When you're a mum, you're giving so much to your newborn that it can be really easy to ignore your own body and your own emotions. And we push that all aside to devote to our baby. And that's certainly what I did. And the wheels started falling off about a year and a bit into it because I hadn't taken the time to look after myself. I hadn't taken the time to process that trauma. Now, of course, it's not just going to be like that. You give yourself some time and attention and those feelings of trauma are going to go away. I really feel like it's kind of all of these things together and you will find your own way. Talking, journaling, meditating, just giving yourself time and space to feel, to cry, to get angry, to release whatever is coming up for you. So this is why yoga can help, because it is that practice of being in the body and moving the body, unlocking those emotions in the body and just noticing and being aware of what is happening in our body, which throughout the rest of our day when we're a mum, we tend to not do because we're so solely focused on that beautiful little being in front of us. So I hope that these tips have helped. I really wanted this just to be an introductory video to the idea of birth trauma and to help you to start getting your head around what is quite a big thing to unpack, but slowly, little by little, giving ourselves time and space and acknowledging that what we are experiencing is very common and is something that is real is the first step. So thank you for being here. Make sure that you check out the other videos in this playlist as they come out so that you can start releasing your experience of this trauma and what it's holding for you. Namaste.